Anthony Garcia,
I'm Fabian.
Janalea.
and our museum project topic is on voyages of Captain James Cook. So to begin with, this is James Cook. He was an explorer and navigator of the 18th century. He was born on October 27th, 1728 in a small village in Yorkshire, England. His father was a farm worker, and at the age of 17, he was originally looking for a job as a coal worker. But then instead he enlisted into the Royal Navy in 1755, serving in North America. So within 2 years, he passed an examination to handle and navigate a royal ship. So he learned how to survey and chart coastal waters. With the experience he had, he was eventually able to achieve in mapping the Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia, and he also changed the Western perceptions of the world.
Geographic.
And so that's a map of his voyage, his route.
Honestly, to travel to see.
Okay, so his first voyage was on the HMS Endeavour. So the main purpose of his first voyage was actually he wanted to record observations of the transit of Venus, but instead what happened, he ended up finding Terra Australis, which is basically which would be Australia later, and this was originally, it was discovered by the Spanish and Dutch had been there, but they hadn't settled. So on the HMS Endeavour, he was the first one to actually settle the land. So he claimed it for the British Crown when he landed at Botany Bay in 1770.
It's funny because when he claimed the land, he did it. The British did it so the French wouldn't get the claim to the land because of the 7 Years' War. So they didn't want the French to claim the land, so they just claimed it anyways, even though they didn't really need to. And then they ended up putting the convicts on the land in Australia.
Okay, so first voyage. So yeah, he was first one to claim the land. Yeah, so basically once he got to Australia, he started colonizing it, and it paved the way for the destruction of Aboriginal peoples. So, with the members on the crew were Captain James Cook, scientists, artists, such as Alexander Buchanan, doctors, students, and the outcome of the first voyage was actually 2,000 drawings of the Pacific plants, birds, and landscapes.
Second voyage. Alright. So the second voyage was from 1772 to 1775. Cook had been promoted to being Captain Cook. He went back to look for what he couldn't find in his first voyage, which was the southern continent. He set two ships to sail from Britain. They were the Resolution and the Discovery. During his voyage, they used a tool called the chronometer, which helped them keep track of time more accurately. It showed that a particular solution to the problem of determining the longitude to the sea had been found. So the voyage came to an end, and they returned back home because of the extreme cold weather. And the voyage laid essentials on of the modern map. And they crossed the Atlantic 3 times. So summarizing this, in his 3 years away, he was able to map the lands, 13 New Zealand, and for the first time the Easter Island and the Marquez Islands. All the islands, not all of the islands peoples he visited were very nice to him. And although he didn't really discover these places for the first time, he was able to like, change the confusion to the European people. And this is the third voyage.
Third voyage. James Cook's third voyage, July 1776 to October 1780. Took the route from Plymouth to Cape Town to Tenerife, New Zealand, Hawaiian Islands along the North American coast, the Bering Strait. So this is known as the Northwest Passage, pretty much trying to find a passage through the north so he can go from Europe to Asia, quickest way. That was pretty much explaining the route he took. So he mapped out the Bering Strait, and then when he went to Alaska, it became known as the Cook Inlet because he settled there. He was trying to go to Hawaii. So after he was in Alaska, he hit these icebergs between Russia and Alaska, and there's these large icebergs, so he had to turn around because he knew he hit this wall and he couldn't cut through back to Europe anymore, or this passage wasn't clear. On an important note though, he during this time when he was going through this passage, this was the period when colonization was happening in America, but the Europeans haven't reached Africa yet, so this is kind of the middle period where he's operating between. In 1778, or by 1778, when they went to Australia, what they expected, the benefits from claiming Australia, territorial gains, they wanted to increase their wealth, and the exploration of the Pacific, which they did. He pretty much traveled all of the southern hemisphere. By the 18th century, they were obsessed with mapping, so you can see their maps progress from just Europe and Asia, and then they start expanding all the coast, and they start drawing all these islands. They really explored the southern hemisphere down to Antarctica. The Spanish didn't believe that the southern continent existed. That's why the Spanish kind of missed over Australia in the first voyage. So in the third voyage, they kind of knew it existed, so now they were starting to go to Antarctica, or the southern continent, what they called it. There wasn't a lot of exploration during that time, but later in the years, during like 1800s, a lot of explorers started going to Antarctica. So once Cook landed in Australia, he went back to Europe, and he wanted to turn Australia into this European garden. So he went back home to Europe. What he came back with to Australia, he brought strawberries, rosemaries, quince, and apples. And also he brought 80 sheep, so he wanted to establish he pretty much established the wool industry for Australia, but most of the sheep died during that time. It's like a couple of them lived. It wasn't until like a couple years later when the Spanish started bringing more sheep over, and that's how the wool industry started thriving in Australia. To continue, 1778, by the end, the British military controlled half of Australia. They established a prison colony. So during this period of the Americas, it was 1777. So you know the Declaration of Independence. They had the revolution going on. So you couldn't put these convicts and these slaves from Australia that you captured, you couldn't put them in America. So you had to put them somewhere else. And that's why they claimed Australia, and they didn't give it to the French, so they can put the convicts on the island of Australia. And pretty much that's what they established a penal colony, and in 1 year it went from 1,000 Anglo-Australians to 1.2 million Anglo-Australians. And this was their enlightened dream to remove people from their lands and kind of help them become civilized and adopt to the European culture. So they pretty much exploited Australia for timber and flax, and they used it as a military base to defend against the Dutch and the French. So this is that was his final voyage. As he was coming back from Alaska, he wanted to stop in Hawaii. So as he goes to Hawaii in 1777, he stayed for a couple months. Then he went to Sandwich Islands. He landed in Kaliuka, I can't say that one, it's a Hawaiian name, Kiliakua Bay in 1779, and he was greeted by the chief of the islands who let him explore the islands. He stayed there for a couple months. During February, he wanted to sail out, but his ship wrecked, so he came back to the islands, and on his return, he was attacked, overpowered, and stabbed to death by the Hawaiians. So he died in February 1779. I didn't include the full story because a lot of historians have controversy on what really happened. Some historians say that the Hawaiians thought he was a god, and they thought during the ritual time when he came, they thought he was the god of war who returned. So they thought it was a practice, it was all part of ritual, and they thought he was the god of war, so they killed him. Others say that they just killed him because they were tired of him colonizing his land, and they wanted to stand up to him. And that's pretty much it, the life of James Cook.